All right, welcome, guys. We're going to continue with some central nervous system content. Just continue moving forward with regards to our material. So let's go ahead and make sure I have this loaded up when I need it. Okay. All right, let's continue where we left off. So today we're going to talk a little bit about the actual structures of the brain that we need to learn. We're going to get a couple of those completed. So let's start off with the brainstem. First of all, I would make sure you're comfortable with the actual structure of the brainstem, so the medulla, the pons, and the midbrain. Don't need to worry about these arteries too much. Not necessary. Obviously, those arteries are important for the brain and the brainstem as a whole, but not necessary for our purposes. We're not doing any sort of cardiovascular content right now. So the brainstem is actually made up of three parts. It's made up of the medulla oblongata, the pons, and the midbrain. So medulla in this green color, pons in this blue color, red for midbrain. It's going to be made up of white and gray matter. Remember, white matter is better for sending signals quick. Gray matter is better for integrating or processing. It is also known as the reptilian brain. Why the reptilian brain? Because our ancient ancestors, way before mammals existed, lizards and basically reptiles and even amphibians before them, had a similar brainstem structure. It is reliable, so this is usually helpful for survival purposes, but tends to be rigid and compulsive. So that is one of the downsides of that reptilian brain, as we call it. Okay, so what's actually happening with these three structures? We just need to know some basic information. There's more to it than just this. Just like when we learned the neurotransmitters, we kind of simplified it. We're just simplifying it here for our intents and purposes. So let's take a look at the midbrain. For the midbrain, we're going to say it's associated with vision, hearing, and motor control. With the pons, we're going to say it's associated with breathing and the communication center for the brain. Especially that breathing part is rather important. Interestingly enough, the pons is the part of your brain that keeps you breathing when you're sleeping. So that's important. And then the medulla oblongata is involved with a lot of different things as well. We're just going to say it's associated with heart and blood vessel function. Next, we have the diencephalon. The diencephalon can be seen here. It's this large purplish color. It's in the center of the brain, so you don't see it on the outside of the brain at all. So you'd have to actually cut into the brain to see the diencephalon. It's made up of two structures, the hypothalamus and the thalamus. The hypothalamus, pay attention to the prefix. Hypo means below. So it's actually going to be below the thalamus. That's what we're observing. Let's first start with the hypothalamus. It's made up of the posterior pituitary gland, the pituitary stalk, and gray matter. We're not going to need to worry too much about that. That's the pituitary gland. That's something we're going to learn a lot more in the endocrine system, but for now, we're fine. The purpose of this is what we really are paying attention to. So what does the hypothalamus do? It acts as a major center for controlling the ANS, the autonomic nervous system. Remember, the ANS splits into the sympathetic and parasympathetic division. Therefore, it helps control the functioning of most internal organs. What about the thalamus? Thalamus is involved with a lot of stuff too. It is a dumbbell-shaped mass, so if you cut into it, you would see that the middle of it is rather thin and the outsides of it are rather large. It actually extends into each cerebral hemisphere, which plays a part into how the thalamus does its job. But for us, for our purposes, we're just going to say that the thalamus is involved with your senses of pleasantness and unpleasantness, or happiness and sadness. Next, surrounding the diencephalon, we have the C-shaped structure with these orbs on them. The hippocampus are the C-shaped structures. The hippocampus, easy mnemonic, you're never going to forget it, is going to be, if you see a hippo on campus, you never forget it. Simple, because it's associated with memory. Memory is a really complex thing, by the way. We'll learn more about that as we progress, especially into our next unit. But it can be rather interesting as far as what's going on. Then we have the amygdala. The amygdala are these orbs on the end. The amygdala are typically associated with more intense emotions like anger and rage and fear. So it is considered the fear center of your brain. Why would fear be important? Why would we have fear? Survival. Without fear, our ancestors would have approached predators like tigers, for instance, and just been like, oh, what's going on? And would have been killed, right? So fear keeps us alive. Too much fear, like a phobia, can obviously be detrimental. Now, the hippocampus, the amygdala, and the diencephalon, the thalamus and hypothalamus, even though it just says hypothalamus, makes up the limbic brain. I'm actually going to change that on the fly while we're here. I think it'll work. Yep. So these make up the limbic brain. The limbic brain is often going to be your unconscious effort. So what do we mean by that? Is it's going to be things that are affecting the things behind the scenes. It's not like so direct. I like to think of your limbic brain as like the little angel and the little devil on like a cartoon character. They're influencing you and telling you to do certain things. And if you think about it, especially hippocampus and amygdala, it makes sense, right? Your hippocampus is your memories. Your memories directly impact how you behave. For instance, if you saw a friend and your friend was acting poorly and not treating you well, the next time you see them, that's going to influence how you behave around them, right? Amygdala is your fear center, so of course it's going to also directly affect how you behave in certain circumstances. Next, we have the cerebellum. Common rule of thumb here is that if a structure is larger, it's typically going to have more involved with it, right? So the cerebellum is the second largest structure of the brain. We just need to know this right here. It helps to control muscle contractions, to produce coordinated movements so that we can maintain balance, move smoothly, and sustain normal posture. It's one thing for a muscle to contract, right? It's a whole other thing for your muscles to be able to move in harmony. So what I use as a mini mnemonic for this is I think of cerebellum. I actually think of like a name. I break it down into Sarah, first name, last name, bellum. And I think that cerebellum would be a ballerina or a ballet dancer. The movements, the intricacies, the movements that required for everything to happen is purely cerebellum, purely cerebellum. And finally, recent evidence shows that the cerebellum may have coordinating effects with other parts of the brain as well. Don't have to worry too much about that, but regardless, it can be helpful for coordination purposes. To conclude this video, let's talk about the largest part of the brain, the cerebrum. The cerebrum, as we just mentioned, largest part, is made up of two parts, outer and inner layers. The outer layer is also called the cerebral cortex. It has these lobes, and we're going to talk about that in the next video. The interior part is mostly going to be white matter for communication purposes. Functions of the cerebrum, that's what we really want to pay attention to. Mental processing of all types. That includes sensation, consciousness, memory, and voluntary control of movements. Consciousness is the one you really want to pay attention to. So having conscious thought is due to the cerebrum. Makes up the neocortex, which is responsible for language. So remember, we talked about the reptilian brain and the limbic brain. Now we have what's called the neocortex. This is responsible for language, abstract thought, imagination, consciousness, almost infinite learning ability, which is incredible. The cerebrum has allowed us as a species to be the apex. And it has allowed us to evolve to this point where we're at today. No other animal has a cerebrum that is this impactful. So that's really a big thing. And if you really want to summarize what the neocortex does, it just helps to develop culture. It has allowed us to develop culture. Okay, so actually that's where we're going to stop for today's video. I think that's a good place for us to conclude. I appreciate you guys checking in. Otherwise, we're going to see you on the next one. Have a good one.